In the freezing Ardennes, a small squad vanishes after hearing strange whispers in the wind. When a rescue team finds a hidden cave filled with eerie secrets, they realize some mysteries refuse to stay buried. What dark truth awaits inside? December 16, 1944. The sky above the Ardennes forest was the color of ash, thick with snow that fell without sound. It was the kind of cold that sank into the bones and stayed there. The trees stood like frozen sentinels, their branches heavy and unmoving. Deep in the woods near the Belgian-German border, a small U.S. reconnaissance squad moved slowly through the underbrush, 6 silhouettes swallowed by the storm. Their mission was simple: scout the northern ridge and report on any German movement near the river crossing. What they found, or failed to return from, would become a mystery that echoed through the ranks for years. At the head of the patrol was Lieutenant Jack Raymer. Tall, lean, and quiet, Jack had seen more than enough war in the past 2 years. He had led men across France and into the heart of Belgium, never asking for recognition, never seeking attention. He just wanted to do his job and get his team home. But this mission was different. Something felt wrong the moment they stepped into the woods that morning. The storm had rolled in faster than forecasted, smothering everything in white. Visibility dropped to near zero, and radio contact grew patchy. By midday the snow was falling sideways, the wind howling like it carried secrets. "Sound off," Jack had said, raising his voice above the gusts. One by one the men answered. There was Parker, the steady one; Green, the skeptic; Simmons, the quiet thinker; O'Reilly, the joker who had stopped joking; and Weaver, the youngest, who still carried photos from home tucked inside his coat. They all moved carefully, eyes scanning the gray world around them. At 1400 hours a brief call came through on the company radio, just a flicker of sound, barely audible through the static. "This is Echo 2, still no contact. Visibility low. Moving west, strange sounds, like whispers in the wind." Then, silence. The company tried again and again to raise them, but nothing came back, not even static. When the weather cleared 3 days later, a search party was dispatched. They found only footsteps leading into the forest. No signs of struggle, no signs of return. It was as if the forest had swallowed the entire squad. Command wrote it off as a tragic loss during one of the coldest winters in Europe. The Ardennes had turned into a maze of snow and shadows, and many squads vanished in those days. But for those who knew Jack Raymer, it didn't sit right. He wasn't the kind of man to let his team get lost. And that final transmission, those whispered words lingered in the minds of everyone who heard it. Jack's younger brother, Thomas Raymer, stationed in a unit near Luxembourg, heard about his brother's disappearance a week later. The letter was brief. Jack's unit failed to return from a recon mission, presumed lost. Weather delayed search. That was it. No details, no answers. Thomas sat alone in the corner of the barracks that night, turning the letter over and over in his hands, the words repeating in his mind like a drumbeat. Jack doesn't just vanish. Local villagers from the nearby town of Trois-Ponts had their own ideas. Whispers spread through taverns and farmhouses that the forest was cursed, that strange sounds had been heard echoing from the cliffs during storms. One farmer claimed he saw lights flickering deep in the woods at night, blue and green like no flashlight he'd ever seen. Another said her grandfather once warned her never to go near the northern cliffs, that the Germans had done things there, experiments that even they were afraid of. The Allied command dismissed these stories. "War breeds rumor," they said. "Fear and imagination take hold during long winters." But still, the locals avoided that stretch of the forest. They refused to chop wood there, even when fuel ran low. They called it De Fluisterbos, the Whispering Woods. By January, the war had moved on. The Germans had launched their surprise offensive. The Battle of the Bulge was in full swing, and there was no time to chase ghost stories. Files were closed, reports buried. Jack Raymer's name was etched into the company's list of missing, and life marched on. But Thomas couldn't let it go. He kept asking questions, kept searching for any detail. One night he found an engineer who had helped review recovered equipment from abandoned outposts. The man said something strange. One of the missing squad's radios had been found days later near the tree line, far from where the team was supposed to be. It was mostly frozen, but when they powered it up, it played a short burst of sound. It wasn't static. It was a whisper. The wind hadn't stopped in 3 days. It carved through the bare branches of the Ardennes like a living thing, carrying with it the low moan of the forest, distant, constant, and unsettling. The snow came and went, but the cold remained. Hidden beneath layers of white, the earth had turned into a silent world of shadows and frost. Into that world walked a new squad of American soldiers, their boots crunching softly with every step, their eyes drawn constantly to the trees. Leading the group was Lieutenant Owen Kessler, a quiet man in his early 30s, who bore the weight of experience in his eyes. His right hand trembled sometimes, not from the cold, but from something that had never fully left him since Normandy. He didn't talk much about what happened there. He didn't need to. The way he walked, always listening, always a few steps ahead, told the others he had seen things they hadn't. Beside him, Corporal Luis Mendoza carried the squad's radio unit strapped tightly to his back. Mendoza didn't hide his nerves. He was the kind who spoke to keep fear at bay, muttering old prayers in Spanish, tapping the lucky coin he kept sewn inside his glove. He had survived longer than anyone expected, and some believed his superstitions had something to do with it. Private Arthur Bellamy brought a different kind of energy, fresh from training. Barely out of school, he moved with a strange mix of eagerness and hesitation. The stories of missing patrols hadn't reached him in full, and even if they had, he wasn't sure he would have believed them. To him, war still carried a strange sense of purpose, a belief that good and evil had clear lines. And then there was Sergeant Nikolai Drazen. Broad-shouldered and quiet, Drazen spoke with a low, thick accent and rarely smiled. Born in Yugoslavia, he had seen his homeland pulled apart and had joined the American forces, not out of loyalty but necessity. He was a man of precision and silence. Where others felt fear, Drazen felt calculation. Their orders were simple on paper: move into the northern forest sector, assess enemy movement, and attempt to locate any trace of Lieutenant Jack Raymer's missing squad. The command expected nothing more than confirmation of their presumed loss. But even before they stepped into the woods, the tension was already there. Locals had warned them without being asked. An old woman at a crossroads crossed herself when she saw them heading north. A boy near the supply tent offered them a map with hand-drawn marks, where the forest changed. Most of the squad laughed it off, but Mendoza didn't. "Nothing good waits out there," he said, that morning, adjusting his radio pack. "Even the Germans are pulling back from this area. That should tell you something." Kessler gave him a look. "They're pulling back because they're planning something. That's why we're going in." Still, the unease grew stronger the farther they marched. At first, they found traces of life: discarded German rations, burned-out fires, cigarette butts that hadn't frozen yet. But no footprints, no patrols, no voices. It was as if the enemy had vanished into the trees without a sound. By early afternoon, the sky had begun to darken, unnaturally. The wind picked up and flakes of snow started falling in thick spirals. Bellamy stared up at the clouds. "Feels like it's about to dump everything it's got," he said, his voice muffled by his scarf. Kessler didn't respond. He was already scanning the tray line ahead, eyes catching a slanted roof barely visible through the snow. "There," he pointed. "Barn. Let's move." They reached it just as the storm broke. The door creaked open with a reluctant groan, revealing a hollow space littered with broken crates and straw scattered by the wind. The roof was mostly intact, and it blocked enough of the storm to offer shelter. They moved quickly, sweeping the space, clearing corners. Drazen took the window, his rifle ready. Mendoza checked his radio, trying to catch a signal through the static. Kessler paced slowly, inspecting the walls. Bellamy set his pack down and sat near the center, trying to warm his hands. Then, something cracked in the rafters above them. They all froze. It was just the wood settling, Kessler told himself, but he saw the way Mendoza stared upward, like he expected something to fall through the ceiling. They stayed there as the wind howled louder. Outside, the trees swayed in the whiteout, forming ghostly shapes in the dark. Inside, the barn felt too quiet. No creaks, no mice, no breath of warmth, just silence. "Feels like this place hasn't been touched in years," Bellamy whispered. Mendoza adjusted the dials on his radio again. "I'm getting something. Just static, but there's a pattern to it. Like it's not random." Kessler moved closer. "What kind of pattern?" Mendoza shrugged. "A slow rise, then drop. Repeats, like someone trying to tune in." Kessler didn't like that. The forest didn't have a history of strange signals. This wasn't the kind of place where coincidence made sense. He glanced at Drazen, who hadn't moved from the window. The sniper finally spoke. We're being watched. They all turned toward him. He didn't blink, eyes in the trees. I saw them before the snow picked up. Mendoza whispered something under his breath again, louder this time. A prayer, maybe. Bellamy looked around nervously. We need to keep moving as soon as the wind lets up, Kessler said. But no one moved. The storm roared above them, shaking the beams of the barn. Outside, the world had turned to white noise. Inside, it felt like they had stepped out of time. And somewhere beyond the walls, through the endless wind, they could hear something else. Not quite the storm. Not quite the forest. It sounded like whispering. The storm had quieted by morning, but the forest hadn't grown any friendlier. Everything looked washed out, colorless, like the world had been drained overnight. The squad moved through snowdrifts and frost-bitten trees, heading east where the terrain started to rise. Lieutenant Kessler hoped to find high ground, someplace to re-establish radio contact or at least to get a clearer view of the area. But the forest didn't seem interested in helping them. Every path looked the same, and the silence pressed in too tightly. Kessler led the way up a slope lined with dead pine roots. The ground was soft in patches, the snow packed unevenly, and visibility was still poor. Mendoza, just behind him, struggled with the radio's weight, swearing quietly with each misstep. Drazen walked in the rear, always watching the trees. Bellamy, between them, was unusually quiet. Something had changed in the group since the barn, something they didn't say aloud. They reached a narrow ridge, and started to spread out when the ground suddenly gave way. It happened fast. An entire section of the slope collapsed, sending Bellamy and Kessler tumbling downward in a rush of snow, dirt, and rock. Mendoza yelled and tried to follow, but Drazen held him back, grabbing his coat and pulling him away from the edge. They shouted their names until after several seconds a faint voice rose from below. "We're okay," Bellamy called. "I think we found something." Mendoza and Drazen worked their way down carefully, using roots and ice-covered rock to steady themselves. What they found at the bottom was no ordinary sinkhole. The collapse had revealed a hidden crevice in the hillside, narrow, steep, and unnaturally straight along one exposed wall. Just beneath the snow and mud, metal beams and rusted cables jutted out. It wasn't natural. Kessler stood just inside the opening, brushing snow off his shoulders. "This was built," he muttered. Bellamy pointed at the rock face. "Look." Barely visible beneath layers of dirt was a faded symbol, an old German eagle crest above a swastika, with worn black letters beneath Abteilung 13. The paint had nearly faded away, but enough remained to recognize it didn't belong to any regular unit. "Abteilung?" Mendoza asked. "That's not a division. That's something else." "Medical unit?" Bellamy suggested. "Not a normal one," Drazen said flatly, staring at the crates stacked along the inner wall. They were splintered, soaked, and half-buried, but the markings were still there. No weapon designations, no supply tags, just numbers, barcodes, and names no one recognized. They stood in silence for a few moments, the only sound the wind moving through the broken hillside. "Whatever this place was, it's been hidden for a long time," Kessler said. "Let's check it out. Stay close. No wandering." They pulled out their lights and stepped deeper into the opening, one by one, until the daylight faded behind them. The tunnel beyond was narrow, just wide enough for a single person at a time. The walls were lined with old cables, some ripped loose, others hanging like veins. Their boots echoed as they moved, the sound bouncing oddly, never quite matching their steps. After about 10 minutes of slow descent, the tunnel began to branch. One side sloped downward, the other continued straight. A rusted metal sign on the wall had long since corroded, but Mendoza ran his glove across it, clearing the grime. "It's in German," he muttered, "but there's Latin under it too." "Latin?" Kessler frowned. Mendoza nodded, his brow tight. "Like real old-school Latin, something about passage and silence." Bellamy's flashlight flickered as he stepped closer. "You guys hear that?" "Hear what?" Kessler asked. "Voices, like whispering." The tunnel fell quiet. Then Mendoza said, "I hear it too." Kessler paused. He didn't hear anything beyond the faint hum of air and the creaks of old metal, but Mendoza's face was pale and his hand trembled slightly over the radio. "They're speaking broken German and Latin. I swear it's not just echo, it's layered, like more than one voice." Drazen's voice cut through. "Keep moving." They followed the lower tunnel, where the air grew colder and the walls tightened. The smell changed too, something sharp and stale that stung the nose. It wasn't smoke. It wasn't mold. It was the kind of scent that suggested things were once stored here and had long since gone wrong. Every step forward increased the pressure. The passage narrowed so much they had to move in single file, turning sideways at some points just to squeeze through. Mendoza's radio scraped against the wall more than once. Bellamy's flashlight bounced nervously across the ceiling. Then Bellamy stopped. "What is it?" Kessler asked from behind. "There's something scratched into the wall here," Bellamy said, leaning closer. Kessler pushed forward to look. In the dim light they could make out the letters barely carved into the concrete. The writing was shaky, desperate. "We were the test." Below it, another line, deeper but sloppier. "He's still down here." The words settled into them like cold water. Kessler looked at Mendoza. "Still getting whispers?" Mendoza's eyes darted around the tunnel. "I can't tell if they're in the walls or in my head." The air shifted again just enough to make the tunnel feel like it was breathing. Drazen moved ahead, rifle ready, while Bellamy reached for his pocket notebook and scribbled the message down. His hands trembled. Kessler wanted to turn them around. Every instinct screamed that this place wasn't meant to be found, but logic duty kept him moving. Whatever happened to Lieutenant Jack Raymer's squad had something to do with this place, and the longer they stayed, the more it became clear. This cave wasn't abandoned. It had been buried. They kept walking. And behind them, far beyond the reach of their lights, the whispers grew louder. The tunnel took a sharp turn, and then the narrow rock walls fell away. Kessler stepped into a hollow space the size of a train station, though not a single window or natural light touched it. Their flashlights swept over the vast underground chamber, cold stone floor, walls reinforced with concrete and rusted steel, and a ceiling arched like an old wine cellar. Something about the air shifted here. It didn't move, didn't breathe. It simply existed, thick and pressing. Rows of broken tables lined the far end of the chamber. Metal slabs, some tipped over, others still bolted into the floor. Shackles hung off the edges, some open, others locked in place. On one table, a long crack ran through the center, as if it had been shattered by force. Nearby, glass containers lay broken. Some had held liquids long since evaporated, while others still held strange dark stains that left Mendoza uncomfortable just looking at them. "Is this a lab?" Bellamy asked, blinking hard. "No," Drazen said, stepping forward slowly. "This is a prison." The walls were covered in peeling posters, diagrams of the human brain, vision charts, written instructions in German. Many were torn, with corners curling from age and moisture. Filing cabinets stood rusted in the corners. Bellamy tugged one open, the metal shrieking. Inside were folders, water-damaged but intact enough to read. Kessler flipped one open, his eyes narrowed. "English," he muttered. "But this isn't American." Mendoza leaned in. Someone translated them. The documents weren't military orders. They were scientific notes, observations on subjects labeled by number, not name. Phrases jumped off the page. Sensory control threshold exceeded. Hallucinations increase with acoustic deprivation. Compliant response under reduced light and oxygen. Designed for accelerated obedience and perception control. Mendoza read aloud. "What does that even mean?" "They weren't trying to make soldiers," Drazen said, his voice low. "They were trying to make tools." Kessler flipped through another file. The dates matched the early months of 1944. There were sketches of headgear, diagrams for isolation tanks, lists of compounds that didn't appear in any standard military kit. There were mentions of test batches, names followed by words like resisted or responded. And then in one folder, a typed list titled Final Transfers, Group. Near the bottom was a name that stopped Kessler cold. Lieutenant Jack Raymer. He stared at it for several seconds, unable to move. Then slowly, he pulled a small leather pouch from under the table, half torn but still zipped. Inside, tangled in a bundle of cord, was a pair of dog tags. He turned one over. "Remember Jack?" Silence fell over the chamber. Bellamy stepped back instinctively. Mendoza muttered something under his breath in Spanish and made a quick sign across his chest. Drazen said nothing, but his fingers tightened around his rifle grip. "He was here," Kessler whispered. Bellamy's voice cracked. "But that would mean he didn't vanish during the patrol. He was taken." Kessler slid the tag into his jacket. "Whatever happened to them, this place is part of it." As they processed what they'd found, Bellamy wandered toward a narrow offshoot of the chamber, a side tunnel that curved sharply downward. "Hey, there's more this way," he called. Kessler turned. "Hold up, don't go alone." But Bellamy had already stepped inside. Drazen moved to follow, but just as he reached the tunnel's entrance, a high-pitched scream echoed from deep within. It was Bellamy. The sound cut off as suddenly as it began. Mendoza rushed forward. "Arthur, stay back," Drazen barked, grabbing Mendoza's shoulder. "It might be unstable." Kessler's light darted into the tunnel, but it was too narrow and twisted, just rough stone and shadow. They inched forward, calling Bellamy's name again and again. There was no answer. Just the soft, unnatural wind again, like someone whispering from deep underground. Drazen found the helmet first. It lay beside the tunnel wall, the side dented, the strap twisted and snapped. He picked it up carefully, inspecting the area. "No sign of collapse," he said. "No rocks, no cave-in, the ground's fine." Kessler crouched beside him. "Then where did he go?" Mendoza's hands shook. "I told you," he said. "He didn't fall. Someone took him." Drazen stared at the tunnel for a long moment, then slowly stepped inside a few feet, scanning with his light. Nothing. No footprints, no voice, no trace of Bellamy, just that same cold pressure in the air. "We go together," Kessler said. "No more wandering, no more separation." They regrouped in the main chamber. Though the air had changed, everything now felt closer, like the walls had drawn in just slightly. Mendoza kept glancing at the tunnel as if expecting Bellamy to walk out. Drazen sat against the wall, rifle across his lap, silently watching the dark. Kessler stood near one of the tables, staring at a cracked observation mirror on the far wall, wondering what Jack Raymer must have seen through it. "Why translate the documents?" Mendoza asked after a while. "Why not just keep them in German?" "Because someone else was reading them," Drazen said quietly. "Someone who didn't speak it. American, or British, or someone from one of the camps." Drazen's tone dropped again. This place wasn't just German. That realization struck Kessler harder than he expected. The enemy wasn't always in uniform. Sometimes it hid behind lab coats, files, or even false flags. This was never about front lines. This was buried, hidden from both sides. And someone wanted it to stay that way. They tried the radio again. Mendoza worked it twice, adjusted the dials, but all they got was static, not even background signals. It was like the cave itself blocked them out. Finally Kessler spoke. "We go deeper." Drazen glanced over.
"What?"
This wasn't the end. This was just the surface. If Raymer was moved, there may be more tunnels. Maybe others survived. Mendoza shook his head. "And Bellamy?" Kessler looked back toward the side tunnel, eyes heavy. "If he's alive, we'll find him. And if he's not, then we find out what did this. For Raymer, for Bellamy, for all of them." Drazen rose without a word, slinging his rifle. Mendoza followed reluctantly, casting one final glance at the helmet lying cold on the floor. He left it where it was. They moved as a unit, now tighter, slower, more deliberate. Every footstep echoed like a challenge to the silence around them. And somewhere in the distance, the whispers stirred again. The silence in the tunnel was different now. It wasn't just still, it felt watchful. The kind of silence that made you feel like something was listening from just beyond the edge of your vision. Mendoza sat against the stone wall, hunched over the German logbook he'd pulled from a rusted drawer in the experimental chamber. The pages were fragile, some stained, others torn, but enough was legible. His hands moved slowly, lips murmuring translations as he flipped through the aged notes. He stopped suddenly, blinking. "They weren't testing weapons," he said, voice quiet but sharp. "They were testing minds." Kessler crouched beside him. "What do you mean?" Mendoza tapped one of the entries. "They used chemicals, locked prisoners underground. No light, no clocks, no sound but their own thoughts. Some went silent after a few days. Others started hearing things." He flipped the page. "One survived all 3 phases. Notes say he began following the voice as if something was telling him what to do." Drazen leaned in, skeptical. "Like hypnosis?" "Worse," Mendoza said. "The doctors didn't know how it worked. They wrote that the darkness might open something in the mind, like the brain created its own guide. Some saw it as a person, others just followed orders they couldn't explain." Kessler frowned. "That's what happened to Raymer's team." "There's no list of outcomes," Mendoza said, "but there's a line in one of the notes. Subjects from patrol Raymer responding to Phase 2, awaiting complete silence before Phase 3 begins." The words settled over them like dust. Drazen stood, scanning the tunnel shadows again. They pressed deeper into the cave, moving as one. Every footstep felt heavier now. Every whisper of wind brought a glance over the shoulder. Mendoza kept the logbook close. Kessler tried to focus, but the air seemed thinner with every step, as if the cave itself was swallowing oxygen. The flickering light from their flashlights created warped shadows that danced across the jagged walls. And then, in the back of his mind, something broke loose. Normandy. Kessler wasn't in the cave anymore. He was back on the coastline, crouched behind a half-collapsed farmhouse. The sky was gray, filled with smoke. A soldier lay beside him, legs pinned beneath the rubble, eyes wide with pain. Kessler had tried to lift the debris, tried until his arms gave out, but the shelling had come back. He remembered the voice in his earpiece yelling for him to retreat. He remembered looking down one last time, meeting the soldier's eyes, then running. Now, in the cave, that same voice whispered again. "You left him." Kessler stopped walking. His hand trembled on the flashlight. "You okay?" Drazen asked. "Fine," Kessler lied. But the whisper lingered, not just a memory. This time it felt like the cave had taken his guilt and turned it into a voice. Mendoza seemed to notice. The log said the voices used what was already in them. Regrets, doubts, weak spot. Kessler didn't answer. He didn't have to. His silence said enough. They continued forward in tense quiet. The tunnel curved, then widened slightly. At the edge of the beam of light, something moved. A figure. Drazen raised his rifle. Hold. The figure stepped closer, pale, staggering, familiar. Bellamy. He emerged slowly, feet dragging, eyes distant and glassy like he hadn't blinked in hours. His uniform was intact, dirt smudged but not torn. There was no sign of wounds, no scratches, no sign of a struggle. He stopped, just feet from them, and stood motionless, staring through them. "Arthur?" Kessler asked. Bellamy didn't speak, didn't move. Mendoza stepped forward, reaching gently. "It's us, you're safe now." Still nothing. Kessler moved in front of him, waving his flashlight slowly. Bellamy's pupils didn't react to the light. His jaw was slack. He breathed, but there was no rhythm to it. Just shallow, steady inhales, like someone reading from a script. Then, in a dry, slow voice, Bellamy whispered, "It's so quiet down there." Everyone froze. Kessler moved in quickly and caught Bellamy's shoulders. "Where were you?" But Bellamy didn't respond. His head tilted slightly, as if listening to something far away. Then his knees buckled. They caught him before he hit the floor. Drazen checked his pulse. Steady. Normal. "Something's wrong," Mendoza said, stepping back. "This isn't shock. He's empty." "We tie him up," Drazen said, "just in case." Kessler hesitated, then nodded. Mendoza pulled rope from his pack. They wrapped it loosely around Bellamy's wrists and ankles, enough to restrain, without hurting him. He didn't resist. He didn't even flinch. Just sat with his back against the wall, eyes unfocused, whispering to no one. Drazen paced. "We need to decide now. Do we keep pushing in or get out while we still can?" Kessler looked toward Bellamy, then deeper into the darkness. "There's more," he said quietly, "and whatever happened to Jack Reamer, whatever took Bellamy, it's still ahead." Mendoza closed the logbook, shaking his head. "This place isn't natural. It's not about strategy or weapons or winning the war. It's about erasing people." "We're already in it," Kessler said. "Too deep to turn back now." He looked down the tunnel again, not because he wanted to, but because some cold logic inside him, knew they had to see it through. For Bellamy, for Jack, for the others whose names would never be found in any report. And in the silence, Bellamy whispered again, "They're waiting for you." The cold was beginning to feel permanent now, like the cave had leached it into their bones. The dim light from their flashlights flickered off uneven stone, and the air had grown heavier, more humid and sour, with every passing minute. Mendoza fidgeted with the dial on his radio, trying to raise someone, anyone. Static. Then click. He froze. Something faint cut through the static. He adjusted the frequency carefully, a soft, rhythmic tapping. At first it seemed random, but as he listened closer, he realized it wasn't. Morse code. Kessler turned sharply as Mendoza stood up. "I've got something. Faint transmission, maybe from another Allied unit." "Can you make it out?" Kessler asked. Mendoza leaned closer to the receiver, narrowing his eyes. ... SOS. Then again, SOS. But it's repeating. Same sequence, No changes, no call sign, just the signal, over and over. Could it be automated? Drazen asked, scanning the tunnel with narrowed eyes. I don't think so, Mendoza replied. It's weak but steady, almost like it's bouncing from deep underground. Could be one of the original patrol's radios on loop. Maybe someone tried to send a signal before. He stopped, glancing at Bellamy. The younger soldier sat still again, staring into the darkness, lips parted as if trying to speak, but no words came. A sudden tremor shook the cave. At first it was light, like the shifting of earth above. Then came the crack, a heavy grinding sound that turned everyone's heads. Without warning, a chunk of ceiling behind them gave way. Dust exploded outward as rock smashed into the floor, sealing off the tunnel they had entered through. Everyone stumbled back, coughing, eyes wide with alarm. Mendoza shouted into the dust. That was no natural shift. Kessler grabbed his shoulder. Anyone hit? No, we're fine, Drazen said, but we're not getting out that way anymore. They all stared at the newly blocked path. The escape route, the only one they were sure of, was gone. A silence followed, thick and suffocating. Then Kessler straightened. We find another way. They moved cautiously now, turning deeper into the tunnel system. Every intersection looked the same. Arched stone, shadowy branches, uneven flooring. Mendoza marked walls with chalk as they went, but even that seemed to fade quickly in the damp air. Kessler made the call to split up. Drazen would check a left tunnel that sloped downward, while Kessler and Mendoza would scout the main passage ahead. Bellamy was left seated near a marker, bound but under watch. Drazen's boots echoed softly as he moved alone, scanning the narrow passage. The beam of his flashlight caught strange scratch marks etched along the rock. At first they seemed random, but he soon noticed they followed a trail, curved lines leading downward, sometimes overlapping with something else. He crouched low. Old stains on the stone, not fresh, but something about them made his skin crawl. Then he saw the boots. Worn-torn, still laced, but the legs in them were gone. He jerked his light forward and froze. A figure stood just ahead. Slim, gaunt, wrapped in what looked like an American uniform, though shredded and smeared with grime. The head was low, and the arms hung loosely, as if lifeless. Drazen raised his voice. Hey, you need help? No response. He took a cautious step forward, but the figure darted silent and fast into a side tunnel. Drazen chased it halfway before stopping. The passage was too narrow, too steep, and something told him not to go further. Not alone. He turned back. Meanwhile, Kessler and Mendoza moved through a broader hall, where the walls curved in unnaturally. Mendoza whispered, this place was shaped, not just a natural cave. Somebody carved these. Could be part of the complex, Kessler replied. Bunkers, holding rooms. Then, from behind them, a scream pierced the air. Bellamy. They sprinted back, light beams bouncing, shadows chasing them. The echo of Bellamy's voice cut off as suddenly as it had started. When they arrived, the air was still too still. Bellamy was slumped forward, ropes frayed beside him, his head tilted awkwardly to one side. Mendoza reached him first and knelt. No signs of struggle, he whispered, but there was no attacker in sight. No footprints, no signs of movement, just silence. He was alone for less than 5 minutes, Kessler said. Drazen arrived moments later, breath short. Something's down here, or someone. I saw it. Kessler turned. What? American uniform. Thin, twitchy, wouldn't speak, disappeared down a tunnel like he knew it by heart. Mendoza stood slowly. It might be one of the lost squad, or what's left of them, Drazen muttered. They sat for a while without speaking, just breathing, thinking. What if this cave rewired them? Mendoza finally asked. What if the experiments didn't fail, they worked? Kessler didn't want to believe that, but he had no better answer. Whatever was down here was older than this war, older than the uniforms or languages, and something in this place, whatever was whispering, wasn't finished. Bellamy had come back only to be taken again, but this time, whatever took him left nothing behind but silence. Kessler stood and tightened his grip on his gear. We move, together, no more splitting up. They left Bellamy there, not by choice, but there was no time to bury, no room to carry. The chalk marks guided them forward again, one tunnel at a time, and as they walked, Mendoza's radio, now slung silently by his side, crackled once more. The Morse returned. faint, still looping. Only this time, there was a second line. A pause, then a new series of taps. Short, uneven, different rhythm. Mendoza stopped walking. It's not just an SOS anymore. What is it? Kessler asked. Mendoza's eyes narrowed as he deciphered. It says, "Don't follow the voice." The tunnels gave way to a long rusted corridor lined with warped metal doors and broken signs in German. The squad had stopped talking. Each step now echoed like a warning. The only sounds were their boots on the damp floor and the soft crackling of Mendoza's radio, which now emitted a low hum, like it was picking up static from another world. Then came a faint vibration underfoot, steady and mechanical. Kessler raised his hand. "Do you hear that?" Drazen nodded. "Something's running. Power." They rounded the corner and stepped into a large underground chamber. Unlike the rest of the tunnels, this one was intact. Fluorescent lights flickered overhead, powered by an old generator thrumming in the corner. Dust floated in the stale air, but the place looked like it had been abandoned in a hurry. The walls were lined with filing cabinets, strange medical equipment, and film canisters stacked like forgotten relics. On one side sat a metal desk covered in open journals. A film projector still stood ready in the center, pointed at a cracked white screen. This was their nerve center, Kessler whispered. Mendoza moved toward the files, brushing off a thick layer of dust. He opened one folder and immediately stepped back, covering his mouth. "Names," he said, "American names." Drazen limped to the projector. "Help me with this. Let's see what they didn't want anyone to find." Mendoza carefully loaded one of the reels. The moment it began rolling, the hum of the generator seemed to fade beneath the flicker of black and white film. They watched in silence. The footage showed rows of captured soldiers, American uniforms, blank faces, strapped to chairs beneath harsh lights, tubes connected to their arms. Unreadable charts filled the background. A German voice spoke, calmly, methodically. The captions explained enough. Subject is administered compound D13, at half dose. Isolated in chamber for 12 days. No outside contact. Result: heightened sensory response. Subject repeats orders without hesitation. Then another clip. A man, tall, dark hair, broad face. His eyes were tired, but alert. His name tag read Reamer, Jack Reamer. Kessler leaned forward, his breath caught in his throat. The voice returned. Subject resists. Immune to prior dosages. Elevated resilience. Proceeding with Phase 3. The final scene showed Jack being led through a reinforced door, marked Whisper Camera. The whispering room, 2 guards closed it behind him. Then the screen went black. "No follow-up," Drazen said quietly. "Nothing on what happened next." Kessler stepped back from the projector, staring into the dim room. They were testing how far they could control people, how deep they could get into someone's mind. "That chamber must still be somewhere down here," Mendoza said, gripping his radio tighter. Drazen turned toward a side tunnel, when suddenly click. A sharp snap rang out, and Drazen crumpled forward. A narrow blade had sliced across his ankle from a rigged trap hidden in the floor. He groaned and tried to lift himself but couldn't. "Trap, old, but still working," he muttered. Kessler and Mendoza rushed to him, dragging him clear of the tripwire. "Stay still," Kessler said. "You'll slow us, but you're not out yet." But something had changed in Mendoza. His eyes darted. His breathing grew rapid. He clutched his radio, whispering to it like it was speaking back. "Don't you hear it?" he asked suddenly, turning to Kessler. "The voice. It's back." "What voice?" Kessler asked, tension rising. "She's telling me you're not who you say you are. You're wearing his face, but your voice, it's wrong." Kessler took a step back. "Mendoza, listen to me. You're tired. The air down here, maybe it's still laced with something. We just saw what they were doing." But Mendoza raised his rifle, hands shaking. "Where is the real Kessler?" Kessler dropped his own weapon slowly and took another step forward. "Louis, look at me. Normandy. You pulled me out of that crater. I was barely breathing. You told me I owed you a bottle of whiskey and a steak when this was all over." Mendoza blinked. For a moment his arms wavered, but then the whispering in his headset returned. "No," he hissed. "That was a lie." He lunged. Kessler tackled him, forcing the weapon to the ground. They wrestled across the floor. Mendoza's mind caught somewhere between memory and madness. The radio buzzed and screamed in static. Finally Kessler broke free and rolled to the side. He didn't wait. He bolted for the narrow shaft on the far wall, just beyond the desk of old journals. There he felt it, a soft breeze. Cough flow, fresh air. He didn't look back. The tunnel was just wide enough to crawl through, the stone scraping his shoulders as he pulled himself forward. Behind him, the chamber echoed with Mendoza's broken shouting. Then, silence. Just the sound of his own breath. As Kessler moved, his mind raced. He had no map, no direction, only the faint sense that he was climbing. The wind in the shaft gave him hope. It had to lead somewhere. He thought of Jack Raymer, of the look in his eyes on that reel, a man clinging to himself when everything around him tried to take that away. Kessler reached for the wall and stopped. A word had been carved into the stone, faint and shaking. Still here. He stared at it for a long moment, then pushed forward. He didn't know what he'd find next. Another trap, another hallucination, or maybe just the cold truth. But he knew one thing now. The whispering cave hadn't just swallowed men. It changed them. And something, maybe Jack, maybe something worse, was still waiting in the dark. Kessler crawled deeper into the narrow shaft, the cold stone pressing in around him like the walls themselves were alive. The faintest sound drifted through the tight space, a soft, almost distant cry that tugged at his mind. It was human, but fractured, like a whisper breaking through the silence of a nightmare. His heart quickened. He pressed on, every scrape of his hands on the rough rock, sending chills down his spine. The air grew colder, heavier. Then suddenly, the shaft ended at a solid steel door, old and rusted but sealed tight. It bore no markings, just a thick layer of dust disturbed by recent movement. Kessler's breath hitched. He leaned close, listening. The cries were clearer now, low, pained murmurs, some rising to desperate sobs. His fingers fumbled along the edge of the door until he found a handle and gave it a cautious pull. The door groaned open, revealing a small, cramped chamber, dimly lit by a single flickering bulb hanging from the ceiling. Inside, the room was chilling. Scattered along the cracked floor lay skeletal remains, long forgotten, yet telling silent stories. The air was stale, heavy with a scent that spoke of years locked away, and secrets buried deep. Scratched into the walls around the room were desperate warnings in English, barely legible beneath layers of grime. Messages like, "Don't listen, they never stop, and the voices come at night." Kessler's eyes caught something on a small metal table near the corner, a worn leather-bound journal, its cover cracked and stained. He picked it up carefully, fingers trembling. The journal belonged to Jack Raymer. With a steady breath, Kessler opened the pages. The handwriting was neat at first, then grew shaky, as if the writer was losing hold of his thoughts. Jack described the horrors of the experiments, how the Nazis used sensory deprivation and chemicals to twist minds. He wrote of the long days spent in this very chamber, where the darkness was complete, and the only sound was a whispering voice that seemed to come from the walls themselves. Jack fought for days, resisting the voice that promised knowledge and power. But as time wore on, exhaustion and isolation took their toll. The whispers told him of battles past, and of those yet to come. They spoke secrets no man should know, pulling at memories and fears until his reality blurred. Kessler's hands shook as he read the final entry. "If you're reading this, it means you heard them too. The voices aren't just echoes, they're waiting. They're patient, and they take what they want. Be strong, don't listen." A cold shiver ran down Kessler's spine. He slammed the journal shut and looked around the room, suddenly feeling the weight of the silence. The whispers, so faint yet so persistent, seemed to creep back into the corners of his mind. He knew it was time to leave. The moment Kessler turned to go, the chamber seemed to shudder. A low rumble filled the air, and the flickering light above blinked erratically. Dust fell from the ceiling, and small rocks tumbled to the floor. Instinct screamed at him to run. He scrambled back toward the door, but the hallway beyond was already crumbling, stones shifting and falling as if the cave itself was closing in. The narrow shaft that had led him here began to collapse, chunks of rock blocking his path. Kessler dug his hands into the earth, clawing through debris, heart pounding with desperate urgency. He could almost hear the voices growing louder, whispers chasing him, threatening to trap him forever in the darkness. With one final push, he squeezed through a shrinking gap, stumbling into a wider tunnel. The cave groaned behind him as the last stones sealed the chamber. Breathing hard, Kessler didn't stop. He followed the airflow, the fresh scent urging him onward back toward the surface. Every step was a fight against exhaustion and fear, but he held on to one thought, the hope that if he could escape, the world outside would finally know what had happened here. The Whispering Cave had kept its secrets too long. Now Kessler carried them with him. The cold air hit Owen Kessler like a slap when he finally emerged from the tangled forest floor. His clothes were torn, smeared with dirt, and soaked from the endless dampness inside the cave. He was alone, exhausted, dead. The world outside was muffled, almost unreal after the suffocating darkness he just escaped. For a moment Kessler just lay there, staring up at the thick gray sky, the bare branches silhouetted against the dull winter light. The storm had passed. The silence was both a relief and a shock after the eerie whispers that had haunted every step underground. Then, voices, clearer, warmer, broke through the quiet. "All right, we've got a survivor," a man called out from somewhere nearby. Kessler blinked hard and tried to sit up. A group of Allied engineers were carefully moving through the forest, their faces tight with relief when they spotted him. He was pulled to his feet, steadying himself against a strong arm. "You're lucky to be alive," one said, his tone low but urgent. "We've been clearing the area since the storm blew over." Kessler managed a weak nod. Words were difficult. The memories inside him were a tangled mess, dark tunnels, whispers, shadows. But now, fresh air and the sound of other people grounded him in reality. He was taken to a nearby camp, where medics wrapped him in warm blankets and offered food and water. Yet even as they treated his exhaustion and minor injuries, there was a noticeable tension in the air. Officers arrived quietly, scanning him with sharp eyes, then exchanging hushed conversations. Later Kessler was pulled aside by a stern man in a neat uniform. "Lieutenant Kessler," he said, voice clipped, "you've had a rough time, but what you've seen here, it's classified. For your own safety and ours, you're to keep this matter to yourself, understand?" Kessler nodded slowly, the weight of the warning sinking in. Official documents and reports had already started to arrive, indicating that the Office of Strategic Services had taken a keen interest in the area. The files hinted at secret experiments and the order was clear. This was to remain buried, a dark chapter best forgotten. But for Kessler, the story wasn't over. Days passed, but the whispers stayed. At first they were faint, soft murmurs drifting at the edges of his hearing, like a breeze rustling dry leaves. Even when he closed his eyes, the voices would rise, indistinct yet persistent, the same fractured German and Latin phrases Mendoza had once described. Sometimes the whispers felt almost like a warning, or a reminder. He tried to shake them off, focusing on the camp's routines, the sound of friendly voices, the cold winter mornings breaking over the forest. But the voices were always there, below the surface, threading through his thoughts. Kessler found himself waking in the night, heart pounding as the whispers echoed around his small tent. Shadows seemed to flicker at the edge of his vision, though no one was there. At times he thought he heard his old squad's voices, reminders of the men who never made it out, their fates tied to the secrets beneath the earth. The echo of Bellamy's silent, unblinking stare haunted him, the knowledge of Jack Reimer's journal, the final plea not to listen. And sometimes, just sometimes, when the wind moved through the trees outside, Kessler thought he heard the whispering wind itself. Despite the warnings, despite the official orders to stay silent, the story lingered with him, a story of lost men, hidden horrors, and voices that refused to be forgotten. The Whispering Cave had claimed much. It had tried to keep its secrets buried deep in darkness, but Kessler had seen enough to know one truth: some voices once heard never truly go silent. It was the spring of 1955 when Owen Kessler agreed to speak again, though only to one person, a young historian named Claire Morton. The war had left him changed. Years of living quietly in a small cabin near the edge of a forest in upstate New York had made him a man of few words and distant eyes. The world around him had moved on, but the shadows of that winter in the Ardennes never fully left. Claire arrived one bright morning, notebook in hand, full of questions and determination. She had uncovered something curious in the Army archives, an unreleased file simply titled Operation Echo, Psychological Warfare Research. The documents mentioned experiments tied to a remote area in Belgium, the same region where the infamous cave was rumored to exist. Kessler listened quietly as Claire spoke. She wasn't here for stories or ghost tales. She was after facts, a history buried beneath silence and secrecy. As the interview unfolded, Kessler's guarded exterior slowly cracked. "The government wanted it hidden," he said, voice rough but steady. "They called it psychological warfare, mind control experiments, chemicals, Voices in the dark, all done in places nobody was supposed to find. He paused, searching for the right words. That cave, it wasn't just a hiding spot, it was part of something much darker. Claire pressed for details, but Kessler shook his head. I've said too much already. What happened down there, it's not something you just forget. I saw men change, voices taking hold of their minds. Some never came back. The historian nodded, her curiosity now mixed with respect, and a touch of unease. Did you ever find peace after all that? Kessler looked out the window at the forest beyond, the wind stirring the branches like a distant whisper. You don't find peace when a voice follows you home. Sometimes at night I still hear it. The wind carries the same whispers from the cave, like it's calling out, waiting. As their conversation drew to a close, Kessler leaned forward and looked Claire in the eyes. The cave isn't gone, it's just waiting for the next storm. Claire left the cabin with more questions than answers, the weight of history pressing down on her shoulders, but she was determined. Months later, driven by the fragments of Kessler's story and the newly declassified files, she returned to Belgium. The forest was quiet and cold, much like the stories described. Walking carefully through the thick underbrush, she found what Kessler had described, a narrow stone shaft, nearly hidden by moss and fallen leaves. The air was heavy, filled with the same eerie silence that seemed to linger over the forest. As she knelt to inspect the opening, a faint sound drifted to her ears, a low whisper, almost like the wind, but filled with something else. Words she couldn't quite make out, spoken in a voice that felt both distant and close. Claire shivered and stood, glancing once more at the narrow cave entrance. The whispers grew slightly louder, echoing softly in the still air. She took a step back. Then the screen fades to black. If you're proud to be American and honor the brave heroes who fought for our freedom, hit that subscribe button. More real war stories are waiting to be told.